Guys like us got no family. They make a little stake and then they blew it in. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about 'em. But not us, Lennie cried happily. Tell about us now. George was quiet for a moment. But not us, he said. Because I got you, and I got you. We got each other. That gives a hoot in hell about us, Lennie cried in triumph. The little evening breeze blew over the clearing and the leaves rustled, and the wind waves flowed up in the green pool. And the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George took off his hat. He said shakily, Take off your hat, Lennie. The air feels fine. Lennie removed his hat dutifully and laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was blur, and the evening came fast. On the wind that sound of crashing in the brush came to them. Lennie said, Tell how it's gonna be. George had been listening to the distant sound for a moment. He was businesslike. Look across the river, Lennie, and I'll tell you so you can almost see it. Lennie turned his head and looked off across the pool and up the darkening slopes of the Gavilands. We're gonna get a little place, George began. He reached in his side pocket and brought out Carlson's lodger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and gun lay on the ground behind Lennie's back. He looked at the back of Lennie's head, at the place where the spine and skull were joined. A man's voice called from up the river, and another man answered. Go on, said Lennie. George raised the gun and his hands shook, and he dropped his hand to the ground again. Go on, said Lennie. How's it gonna be? We gonna get a little place? We'll have a cow, said George. And we'll have maybe a pig and chickens, and down the flat we'll have a little piece of fafa. For the rabbits, shouted Lennie. For the rabbits, George repeated. And I get to tend the rabbits. And you get to tend the rabbits. Lennie giggled with happiness. And live on the fat of the land. Yes. Lennie turned his head. No, Lennie. Look down there, across the river. Look, you can almost see the place. Lennie obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There were crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked toward them. Go on, George. When we gonna do it? Gonna do it soon. Me and you. You and me. Everybody gonna be nice to you. Ain't gonna be no more trouble. Nobody gonna hurt nobody nor steal from 'em, Lennie said. I thought you was mad at me, George. No, said George. No, Lennie. I ain't mad. I never been mad. And I ain't now. That's a thing I want you to know. The voices came close now. George raised the gun and listened to the voices. Lennie begged. Let's do it now. Let's get that place now. Sure. Right now. We gotta. And George raised the gun and steadied it. And he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lennie's head. The hand shook violently, but his face sent and his hands steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lennie jarred, and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. George shivered and looked at the gun, and then he threw it from him, back up the bank, near the pile of old ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries and with the sound of running feet. Slim's voice shouted, George! Where you at, George? But George sat stiffly on the bank and looked at his right hand that had thrown the gun away. The group burst into the clearing and Curly was ahead. He saw Lennie lying on the sand. Got him, by God! He went over and looked down at Lennie, and then he looked back at George. Right in the back of the head, he said softly.